Welcome to Free, the Forum for Real Economic Emancipation. I'm Clara Mattei, and our podcast aims at diving into the real world impact of economic systems and exploring how we can build something better. Last week, I had the pleasure of being on Jon Stewart's weekly show, and we really touched on some core features of the logic of our economy.
I find what Clara is saying very compelling. It's very difficult for me to look at the inequalities that she just sketched out, which is, the problem in this country is not the able-bodied young men that don't work, but somehow have access to health insurance as the reason why, our country is falling apart. It's this idea that you can work your ass off and still need food support. Look, we've got a food bank here locally. You cannot believe the business that it is doing in the richest country in the world. So my position is always, America doesn't have a wealth growth production problem. It has a distribution problem, that the people who create that wealth do not benefit commensurately in the way that they should. It's not about entitlement. It's about investment and distribution.
All right. Yeah. In the United States, more than 1 out of 10 Americans are in absolute poverty, and more than 1 out of 6 children are in absolute poverty. In the meantime, we have the super rich who constantly get richer. For every $1 of new wealth earned by a person in the bottom 90% of the population globally, each billionaire gains roughly 1.7 million. In the United States, 3 people own more than 150 million people combined. This is clearly a distribution problem. What I think needs to be discussed, and this is what we will try to do here at Free, is the fact that distribution cannot be separable from the production problem. And this is exactly the point. The distributive effects of our economy are just the manifestation of a deeper problem, which is about the non-democratic relation of production that is at its foundation. The fact that those who produce value don't get to decide why this value is even created, to the point that we have our own citizens here in the United States building those bombs that go kill the children who are in line starving in Gaza. This fact that we have no say about what is being produced and why, and we don't even get to keep the value we are producing. This is ultimately the foundation of the capital order. The capital order is this invisible framework that is at the foundation of our economy that never gets discussed. Why? Well, because people prefer to take on the categories that mainstream economic diffuses. And I do think that in the Jon Stewart show, it was very interesting because we kind of saw the different approaches to economics that are out there. And of course, the approach that I take is largely not the dominant one. Why? Well, because the dominant categories are those that allow us to accept the current world we're in. They allow us to think that it is normal that we can just sit and watch while our tax money is going to the extermination of other people in the rest of the world. This deeply dehumanizing face of our economy is only possible because we are stuck into mental categories that structurally disempower us. We feel weak, and we feel weak not only because clearly we have very little say in how our economy runs, but also because we feel that we can't understand what's happening because only very few people have that knowledge to actually rationalize what is this completely irrational world. So we kind of delegate and think, well, those guys think it's rational, so it must be rational, right? Those guys have a PhD and they tell us that this world is the best one we can afford to be in. They must be right. And so this dissonance between our daily lives, our feeling of pressure, of dissatisfaction, of our feeling of just anger and frustration at what we see in the news, and no one really takes action to stop the annihilation of a whole population in Gaza. This feeling of complete disempowerment and the feeling that something is wrong doesn't square with the type of ideas that ultimately try to underplay our feeling of frustration, right? This is what Antonio Gramsci, a very important scholar, ultimately called the contradictory common sense. People actually know much more than the experts above what is the problem, but they can't speak out because they feel that ultimately ideas are being spun by those at the top that must know better. And this is where I think free can make a difference, is to say, we need to find those scholars who understand that their position is part of the class struggle. If you are the one who is privileged enough to be able to actually have time to think and read and write. And by the way, I'm one of those privileged ones. I'm a professor of economics. I've actually spent my life reading and writing. You need to understand that in this position, you do participate in the society you're in and you take a part. And you can decide what part you want to take. And the majority of academics, of course, take the part of those at the top and ultimately try to find the best way to, again, justify and rationalize the complete irrational. I think we can find around us also those scholars that have been more courageous in saying, you know what, I'm privileged, but I can try to put myself in the shoes of the less privileged and try to theorize from that point of view. And this is exactly the type of knowledge that we can use to empower those movements that already are on the ground, trying to change things. And this is, I think, a very important point about what Free is about and what our podcast is about. We are not trying to just say experts know it all and everyone else should just learn. We're trying to say we're finding those experts that understand how their knowledge is embedded in this society that is highly classist, have taken sides. And the side of truth is the side of a position that is critical of our capitalist economy. And this is what we need to be able to say out loud. The side of truth is more courageous than just justifying the system. And at the same time, these scholars are going to be in conversation with those who do know how the world works because they are trying every day to change things and see how difficult it is. So this is a bit of what we're trying to do here, is to say knowledge comes out of social struggle. Knowledge can empower social struggle, but social struggle also is part of how this knowledge is being created in the first place. I go back to Gramsci to say this is what praxis is about. Antonio Gramsci, who became one of the most important intellectuals, he wrote the prison notebooks when he was put into jail by the fascist regime in Italy. Well, his ideas in these prison notebooks all stemmed from his participation in the factory councils in 1919, 1920 with the comrade workers, with those that were on the ground organizing to take back production in a more horizontal and democratic way. So this is a little bit of the spirit, I think, because we need to debunk those categories that keep being internalized passively by us. And I think in the show, all these categories actually came out really well. And on the Jon Stewart show, we heard all of these justifications for the system that ultimately sound hollow to people at this point. And I think this is what's really exciting, is that instead of feeling extremely depressed, one can also see that people right now, given how violently, overtly dehumanizing our economy is showing right now, given how clearly the economy is showing its violent face, people are more open to ideas that dig deeper. So we can't just, blame the imperfections of the market, for example. This is how economists usually tell us that the problem is not the market, are those imperfections that don't allow the market to operate as it should. We need more than this. We can't just call out the imperfections of the market, the problem of a lack of competition. We need to understand that the market itself is not the realm of freedom, but the realm of unfreedom that is part of the problem. And we need to understand again how the market would not be without coercive relations of production. Similarly, we can't just see the problem as neoliberalism, right? This is another idea that spins all the time. Oh, yes, of course there's problems, but it's neoliberalism. We need to stop and think about these long-term tendencies. And my work right now really tries to say, hey, the golden age, the famous years in which capitalism was showing its humane face, were years in which, by the way, over 20% of the American population was in poverty. And guess what? The majority were the Black people and the other minorities in the United States. This was not the best of possible worlds. In the meantime, we had the war in Vietnam. We just had a war in Korea. We had killed millions of people to boost our American economy. And this economist knew very well. They said, war is, there's a very nice chart I found actually in some archives that really shows how, there's written war and there says, what are the cons? Well, the destruction of human life. What are the pros? Economic growth. This is exactly the problem. Economic growth, as we know it today, is incompatible with the logic of need because it's based on the logic of profit. And guess what? Militarism is the best way to allow our economy to grow. And this is why you see right now that the debt ceiling can be increased when it's about boosting military expenditure. This is why we see right now that over $1 trillion will be spent in a year, next year, on defense while people are hungry, not just around the globe. And there's 1 billion people now who are going starving. So this is a peak. Also in the United States, people are hungry. But in the meantime, resources are spun towards those sectors that allow for our economy to grow. Another category that needs to be debunked, and I think we will have many more to think about, is this idea that if things go wrong, it's about political corruption that has very little to do with our economy. And this is the favorite narrative of new institutionalist economists. And for example, James Robinson with me on the show is an exponent, won the Nobel Prize by proposing new institutionalist ideas. New institutionalist ideas are very interesting because they try to say we are different from neoclassical economics. We are different from the mainstream that supposedly is the dominant economic view that has justified our economic system since the very beginning. We are different. Why? We're different because we consider institutions as part of the picture. Now, what is interesting here is that the way this happens is any way to decouple those institutions from the market. So rather than saying we need to understand the market as being in itself an institution that runs thanks to other institutions, and this is why we should understand not just the market, but capitalism as an entire socioeconomic system that has a legal face, that has a constitutional face, has a political face. They tell us, no, actually institutions are what impedes the market competition from operating in the dynamic and progressive way it could, right? So these institutions are understood as corrupt and not being apt to support the supposed innate technological innovation and advancement that the market could give us. And this is particularly nasty when it's applied to understanding the global South, because then the point becomes the issue is not the history of colonialism, of imperialism, the fact that still today there is much more money coming out of the Africa and other global South countries than the money coming in aid. Why? Because the capital offshoring, because of interest rates going up and thus the interest on debt that keeps increasing. Oxfam reports that in 2024, the super rich in the global north extracted 30 million an hour from the global south. This is data you can find. This is not the problem in this viewpoint. The problem are actually the institutions of the global south itself. As Robinson said, the problem are the Colombian people. The problem are those institutions that are corrupt, and it's the corrupt domestic elite that is really the problem, because they're not allowing the market to be as efficient as it should. You see here the distortion of the picture, because you're saying, well, we consider institutions. So we're better than neoclassical economists that just abstract away in these like models of supposedly only homo economicus. But at the same time, the type of institutions we consider are understood as not at all embedded within the capitalist economy, to the point that instead of seeing the global picture, you're able to actually blame the institutions on the ground of these countries in the global north. And this is, by the way, the exact framework that IMF follows today, right? When they talk about structural adjustment programs, it's all about, which is a very, very strong form of austerity, which is all about actually privatizing, opening up to the global market, deregulating labor so as to make labor more precarious, detaxing corporations and big profits. Well, this recipe ultimately buys that logic, right? Because it's telling us, well, if you only let the market be, if you only actually let the market come in more into people's lives, that's how you solve the problem. And we know historically that actual austerity in the global south, just as much as in our country, has reached the effect of boosting capitalist profit, but actually killing livelihoods and worsening economic and social conditions for people. These are just some examples, I think, of how different methods tell you a different story about this world. And there are certain methods that can be very emancipatory. The Forum for Real Economic Emancipation is trying to tell us this, that actually knowledge can be emancipatory if it is courageous enough to look deeper. While there's other methods that do exactly the work that our economy needs today, which is that of making us think that there is no alternative, that this is all natural, that this is the best we can get, and that those at the top deserve it. Right now, I think given the very, very dark times we're living in, we can't afford this anymore. We can't afford those at the top to tell us how we should think. The darkness is inconceivable. I mean, the fact that people going to work risk getting deported, the fact that there is so much violence everywhere, is something that we clearly either give up on or try to embrace, saying, well, how does knowledge help us move forward? This is the spirit of free. It's a spirit that has excited many, many people. I moved to Tulsa from New York exactly because I realized that keeping critical knowledge to a very restricted circle is useless. I was working at the New School for Social Research, the most prestigious place where to do critical or heterodox economics. But I also saw that I had very little space there to actually get these ideas outside of the circles of those lucky people who could actually study these critical ideas. I moved to Tulsa with this project in mind. And what I saw is that this project is not just mine. It's a collective project now. So many people came on board to say, we start from discussions that are real, that are courageous, that are vital, with everyone who wants to participate. And this might help those who are already in Tulsa, as everywhere else, trying to move things forward for a better world. Thank you for being with us. We will start a series of conversations with a lot of very interesting people starting this fall. The first one will be with Camila Vergara on oligarchy and grassroots democracy on August 25th. And I hope you can explore more by visiting freefreeforum.org. Thank you so much.